It's a little behind schedule, but here is the final part of the RPGs I've played during 2023 in the order they were played. Firstly, there was Tales of Vogar, which I played on PC and it took 6 hours to finish. I know what you're thinking, but no, this isn't part of the Tales of series, it's actually an indie game created predominantly by one developer. The game is centered around Ascan, a prince whose homeland is invaded and eventually usurped. He, along with his brother, managed to escape while his parents lose their lives during the insurrection. The game thus takes on the simple yet gripping premise of reclaiming one's home and bringing peace to all. Now, while the game is short, it's got some fairly decent content within it, with a clear goal all the way through focused around raising an army to retake Ascan's home. To do this, the game sets you off on a number of missions that you can tackle in any order you want. As you travel around the continent to finish these missions, you'll be partaking in turn-based battles with some well-animated character models during the fights themselves. Any lover of turn-based RPGs will find pretty much every element synonymous with the genre, like attacking, defending, item usage, and a multitude of skills to use, though I would have preferred a few more options given to the player in the late game, especially considering that there are only 3 playable characters in the game. Stuff like, I don't know, combination crafts to add a little more spice, or even class progression tied to specific side quests. It's a good battle system, though it could have used a little bit more to allow it to really stand out. What definitely does stand out though is its OST. It has some solid songs in there, especially for the final battle, so it easily won me over there. I also think the exploration, when it's encouraged, is fairly good. There are a few instances where if you go out of your way to solve some puzzles, you will find items that will directly aid in the battles to come, like granting accessories that give immunity to certain status effects that a boss will inflict, or giving you armor and weapons that are far above what you currently own. Again though, there's just not enough of it. Tales of Vogar certainly gives you that dopamine hit of finding shiny loot, but I just wanted more. And if anything, that's one of the game's biggest drawbacks. It has many great ideas that just aren't expanded enough to be a significant highlight. Which brings us to the story and characters. Just like much of the game, they start really well but just aren't given enough time to simmer and gain a flavour of their own. I think the antagonist in this game had great potential, as did the protagonists, but a lot of the arcs feel shallow, even when considering how basic they are in terms of archetype, and I think the biggest factor that works against both of them here comes in the writing itself. The dialogue is easily the biggest issue I had with Tales of Vogar. The intended message is there, but it never really hits right, whether it be a joke that falls flat, or stilted writing that doesn't have that nuance and natural flow to it, like say this part here. Yeah, the message is there, we know what's going on, but there's just something missing in the delivery. That being said, it has been written by someone whose first language is clearly not English, and credit to the developer, I did get in touch with them directly to let them know that this was the biggest issue I had with the game, and they did take it very well. And that's the thing really, I may be coming down hard in this game, but even indie titles have to be measured against a certain bar. In a space where we have games like Cosmic Star Heroine, Chained Echoes and Crosscode, it has to at least be put against those contemporaries. And Tales of Vogar, while being a decently fun RPG and fairly short too, thus it can function as a good palate cleanser, doesn't measure up to those other titles. That being said though, is it actually worth the money? Considering it costs £10 to purchase, I'd say that's a good deal. You spend more dropping off a passenger at Heathrow Airport nowadays, heck you'd spend more buying a coffee at Terminal 2. It does have flaws and it's not going to be the greatest turn-based game you've ever played, but it has soul, and it was clearly made with a lot of care. I do hope the developer keeps making more games, they're definitely on the right path I feel, and if they take this as a learning experience for their next project, they could be on to a winner. The second game I played was one I was really looking forward to when it was first announced in Master Detective Archive's Raincode. It's a Switch exclusive, so no need to elaborate on the platform I used, and it took me 40 hours to beat. Now yes, it's not an RPG, it's a mystery adventure game, but I always cover games that have overlaps with the genre, especially ones that I know fans of RPGs can enjoy. Raincode is just another one of those. In this adventure, you play as a master detective in training called Yuma Cocohead. What a name that is. Yuma has lost his memories and finds himself waking up in a lost and found room at a train station. He reads a letter that has been left for him and boards a train to the city of Karnai Ward, a sector that is effectively shut off from the world and where the rain never stops. The job of the detectives is to unravel the so-called mystery of Karnai Ward, which is what the game focuses on throughout. He's not alone though, as a ghostly presence called Shinigami is right beside him along the way. She tells Yuma that she is haunting him because he traded his memories in an effort to use her powers as a death god, so she functions as the secondary protagonist. Now the gameplay of Raincode is split into two distinct modes. Initially you have the exploration phase, where Yuma and Shinigami can roam Karnai Ward to find items that lead to optional events, do side quests, or find clues to solve mysteries. Each chapter begins with some sort of crime being committed, and thus Yuma has to gather as many clues as he can for when he comes to solve it. When enough of these so-called solution keys are gathered, Shinigami uses her power to take Yuma to the Mystery Labyrinth, which is a visualization of the case and all the obstacles preventing the truth. If Yuma is able to get to the end of this labyrinth, the case is solved and the game progresses. Now it sounds very simple, but that is not a precursor to conclude that it is uninspired. Raincode has some of the most creative cases and mysteries in any game I've played, and they all feel so unique from each other. Every single chapter had me on the edge of my seat, actively thinking about how an event occurred, what possibly could have been done to make it happen, and what aids it further are the abilities of the master detectives themselves, called fortes. Fortes are the techniques that give master detectives their titles, and they are used to help in the solving of mysteries, ranging from being able to disguise oneself perfectly or detect any living being in a specified radius. Each of the abilities are used really well in the story, and they're a big part as to why each case feels so distinct from one another. As for the labyrinth itself, this is where the other part of gameplay comes into it. Yuma will go through the labyrinth and solve problem after problem to eventually lead himself to the truth. These problems are normally solved through a minigame, either Yuma facing off against an individual who is attempting to conceal the truth and rebuking their statements with contradictions, or finding keywords linked to a case in a game reminiscent of Pop-Up Pirates. Yuma also has a skill tree that will aid him in the later cases, for example granting more health or assisting in some of the minigames themselves. It's not your typical progression that you'd see in a standard RPG, but it's there. What's really cool about the labyrinth though is that it not only allows Yuma to conceptualize the case, it allows the player to do the same thing. There's some really creative methods used to visualize and aid in the solving of a case. For example, sometimes Yuma is not asking the right question, and when he changes perspectives, the labyrinth will change in motion with his thoughts to lead to another route. And when you do get to the end, the answer is not always in black and white as one may think. There are some morality issues that come into play here as well. It really gets the player to ponder over their actions. That being said, I don't really want to say too much more about the labyrinths because the mysteries are such a great part about this game, and you really need to see it for yourselves to truly grasp how enjoyable they are. But that's far from the only reason why this game is so good. It nails a plethora of aspects that I'm just shocked it didn't get more fanfare. The star of the show is not Yuma, it's not Shinigami, nor any of the other characters, though they are great themselves. We will touch on that later. Rather, the star of this game is the city of Karnai Ward itself. Karnai Ward is such a brilliant setting for the tone that Master Detective Archives is going for. A city of unending rain that has secrets in every alleyway. It's on edge, it's eerie, and it made me feel uneasy just walking around the streets, like I was always under threat by something. The atmosphere of this game is stellar, it's top draw. If you want to find a game that gets its ambience right, play Master Detective Archives Raincode. Similarly, if you want to experience a story that won't disappoint, also play Master Detective Archives Raincode. What a fantastic story, filled with suspense, decent pacing, tangible and meaningful developments at every juncture. It's just top tier. The only thing I disagree with in regards to this narrative is that the game was rated as 16+ in the UK. Like what? This game should be rated 18+, no doubt about it. At least the ESRB got the memo across the pond and slapped an M on it. There's some mad messed up stuff in this game, but it's never just for shock factor. It all comes together so well come the climax. I struggle to think of anything that wasn't answered by the end. The characters, they're nearly all batshit insane outside of Yuma. It's like he's the only normal one in this game and he's trying to push his way through the insanity that's opening up in front of his eyes. But once again, it fits. It doesn't feel out of place at all. The characters are exaggerated to the point of stupidity, but it makes sense in this land of Kanai Ward that has closed itself off from the rest of the world. Lack of contact with the outside world can do that to a person. That being said, Yuma does have Shinigami by his side, and she is certainly eccentric with some very interesting cutscenes specific to her. But in reality, Shinigami is needed. She is needed because the game can get so tense at points that you require her humour as a balancing act to bring you back down a little bit and regain your composure. I can certainly see some people not appreciating her presence because of that, but she was such a good character to me and worked perfectly in combination with Yuma. There's undeniable chemistry between them and decent developments too. Their relationship visually changes for the better as the game goes on, and it's well presented to boot. The only drawback I can think of for Raincode is that it's locked to the Switch. This game deserves to be on hardware that can push above 720p. I can only imagine what Kanai Ward would look like at higher resolutions. Alas though, it's stuck there for the time being, maybe forever unfortunately, but even so, you cannot skip this game if you're into mystery adventure titles, or if you're an RPG fan like me who digs a great story. Master Detective Archives Raincode is fantastic, nearly a masterpiece I'd say. I was enamoured with it from start to finish. I didn't put it down, I played nothing else, and all I wanted to do during my free time was turn on my Switch so I could see what came next. It's a brilliant game, one of the best I've played this year, and I recommend it to anyone who enjoys a mystery adventure title. The third game I played was Eternights on PC, and I finished it in 13 hours. Eternights was a game that I played the demo for a few months back, and it became an instant purchase as soon as it released. From that demo alone, I was confident that the game wasn't going to let me down, and sure enough it ended up being a great experience overall. Eternights begins with your self-insert protag hanging out with his friend as they search for love via a dating app. No luck on that front though. At the same time though, we see a news report on the so-called Eternights wonder drug that supposedly slows aging, but virtually overnight, the whole world goes to hell, causing the populace to turn into zombified figures. A pretty sharp turn in tone within a minute, and that's something that Eternights does really well. Many times it's humorous, the choices you can make for dialogue were witty and fun, and they were getting the odd chuckle out of me. If you want to be a degenerate, you can, and you know, well, I did do this at points too, I admit, but then it's not afraid to flip the switch in a nanosecond to a more eerie tone as well. The atmosphere was just on point, as were other factors like the lighting, the claustrophobic environment, and it results in something that is more than the sum of its parts. I can definitely see some people saying it's too anime and be put off by that, but I'm all on board. In fact, what I did find impressive is that the game has some animated cutscenes here and there, despite being an indie project that was mostly done by one individual. The fact that Studio Sai actually worked with an animation team for some of the scenes is a neat touch overall. Talking about anime, we're entrusted with our divine mission by the Architect, who is pretty much your isekai goddess character you see in all these adaptations. She's a bit weird, yet comforting at the same time, and she grants the protag the ability to fight against the hordes of enemies and ultimately tasks you with saving the world. Now, the core of the gameplay is split between three sections. Most of the time you'll be spending it on a train in between main story missions where you partake in the social sim aspect to raise your abilities for the coming fights, and you'll have a set number of days to do so before you have to progress the story. These events will grant essences that can be used to not only improve your own skills, but also grant abilities to your partners like buffs, spells, and healing abilities, not to mention also yielding straight up stat increases. It's a disservice to say though that simply powering up was the only thing I cared about, as I thought the characters themselves were decently written for the most part. All the love interests are unique, have their own compelling story, and I very much bought into each of them. It also helps that the voice acting is pretty good, surprisingly good even, with Japanese, Korean, and English options.
歯磨き粉は役割さえ全うできれば、考えてみると不思議なものね。数日前まで私たち赤の他人だったのよ。なのに今は同じチームだなんて。
As you talk to them, they'll also come to you with problems to solve, like extra training that function as minigames, or they'll ask you for essential commodities that have run out. This second one in particular segues over to another notable part of the gameplay. If you choose to assist them in finding these items, you go on a scavenging mission where you choose from one of 3 zones in order to find it within a set time limit. This is a cool idea, but it's a bit weak overall, as it basically boils down to a memory game. You try and remember what zone had what, and also try to recollect whereabouts in that zone it was. If you find it, you get more essence to power up. If you fail, you waste that period of bonding time, but it's nothing that a bit of save scumming can't circumvent. Eventually though, you will need to leave the train and progress the story, meaning you get involved in the game's combat and dungeons. The combat itself takes on an action-based archetype and is pretty good, simple but enjoyable. It's visceral, fast, and the controls feel tight. You have one combo of attacks mapped to the X button, but when you hit the end of your chain, you can do a combo ender which works like a quick time event. You also have a dodge and the so-called elemental fist tied to a gauge at the top left of the screen, which allows you to access the abilities of the other heroines, who each have their own affinity that is effective against different enemies. You fill it up via dodging and attacking enemies, and then unleash it for heavy damage. You also have a wide array of abilities to use courtesy of the skill trees mentioned earlier, so the gameplay always feels that it's gradually enriching. The dungeons are pretty good too. There's certainly a good diversity of scale in there, from research institutes to labyrinthian structures, and they've got a strong variety of puzzles too. I was fairly impressed with the creativity on display for these brain teasers. Boss fights are mostly satisfactory, not too challenging, but they make the most of the game's battle system. I'd say the only thing I wasn't impressed with was the OST. The developers opted to go for some sort of static grunge style to match the atmosphere, but it just sounds broken at points, leaving many of the high-octane boss battles without any music accompanying it. If the game did have a great OST, it no doubt would have drew me in even more. The most stirring thing about Eternights though is that it maintained that good impression near on all the way through, and it ended in an inspired manner. I was very much on board with how they handled the ending overall. It actually felt like the stakes were high. I was invested in the choices I had to make, and they really made that stick, which is something a lot of RPGs nowadays struggle with. For an indie project that promised a lot, I think it delivered, and in some cases exceeded my expectation. Sure, it has drawbacks like many of these games do, but the actual core of its premise, namely the action-based gameplay and the social sim aspect, were solid throughout. I was very happy with my experience by the end, as was I happy to hear that Studio Sai recently received $7 million in funding for their next project, and it's very well deserved. The developer made clear that the studio is now expanding to the size of a small team, and their next project will be utilising Unreal Engine 5 rather than Unity Engine. Needless to say, I am very much looking forward in anticipation for what they come up with next. The fourth game I played was one I had high hopes for once again, in Fate Samurai Remnant. I played it on PC and it took me just over 41 hours to beat. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a die-hard Fate fan. I'm not too well versed in the Nasuverse, which is pretty much an iceberg that stretches to the core of the earth, but I do enjoy the more mainstream works of Type Moon. I've read the original Fate Stay Night visual novel, watched the anime work, so Studio Dean's adaptation, Fate Zero, Unlimited Blade Works and the Heaven's Feel movies, along with some of the spin-offs like Carnival Phantasm and yes, even Prisma Ilia. So I have a bit of a background with Fate, and when I heard there was going to be an action RPG in the Fate universe with its own separate story, I was very much excited with what they would come up with, so I bought it pretty much on release day. My overall experience though was difficult to pinpoint. I ended up concluding that Samurai Remnant was on the right path in terms of what it went for and was a great game as a result, but I felt like it was missing something to make it truly memorable. In this adventure, you take control of Miyamoto Iori, the adopted son of legendary Ronin Miyamoto Musashi. He lives as a debt collector in a certain area of Edo during the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, which would later become the Tokyo we know today. Eventually, Iori is attacked by a foe of immense strength, but just before he is felled, his hand glows and a warrior called Saber, garbed in white, stands before him, effectively saving his life. Iori soon discovers that he is one of 7 participants in the so-called Waxing Moon ritual, and the winner will have their wish granted by using the essence of the defeated candidates as a catalyst. Any fan of Fate will see the parallels here. The Waxing Moon ritual substitutes for the Holy Grail War, and it takes on a similar premise. 7 masters and 7 servants of legend do battle to emerge victorious. For anyone not familiar with the Fate universe though, I think the game does a good job in explaining the intricacies of what the ritual entails without going into too much unnecessary detail. Now as for gameplay, you initially have exploration of various districts of the city of Edo. Iori can wander around to complete certain side missions like petting cats and taking out groups of thugs to keep the streets safe. I will say that the developers did a really good job in bringing the city to life. Every district feels distinct and unique despite being part of the same area essentially. Fate fans will also find plenty of nods to the wider series if they search around, either through encounters with familiar faces or through the enjoyable digressions, which are essentially optional social events that dive deeper into the various characters who appear in game. Samurai Remnant clearly had a lot of care put into it, and that's very evident when looking at the cutscenes. Some of the pre-rendered cinematography looks absolutely amazing, encapsulating the wonder and awesome feel of the Fate series on screen, just like UFO Table's adaptations. I can't help but feel that this game would look just as good if it got the same treatment as Fate Stay Night one day, and there's been suggestions that they might even look to doing that sometime down the line. The character designs look great, all of the servants in particular are brought to life in an eye-catching and pleasing way, and the OST is also pretty good overall. I wouldn't say it's my cup of tea, but it has some decent tracks in there. Now as you explore, it won't take too long until you're drawn into battle, and there's a lot of that in Samurai Remnant, as it takes on this hybrid Musou action RPG approach. For the most part, you're controlling Iori, who has a variety of sword styles attached to him. Each sword style comes with its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, water style is perfect for large groups of enemies, while fire style is slow but does a huge amount of damage. What's great is that each style also has its own skill tree attached to it, functioning as a method to gain raw stat increases or learn new abilities, so there's tangible progression on offer. And what's better is that you can progress in the way you want by pursuing the sword styles that you prefer. However, Iori cannot win this war by himself, hence why Saber fights alongside him. And when a gauge fills to the top, you can actively switch control over to Saber herself, who is a far cry from Iori in terms of gameplay, dealing much more damage in the early stages and having far more impressive animation for the most part, intentionally so. At the end of the day, the servants are based off of legendary real-life figures, and are in lore meant to be far stronger than their masters for the most part. They essentially go beyond what humans are capable of. And Samurai Remnant does a great job in showing that aspect off, not only through Saber, but also the other servants as well that you can play as at certain parts of the story. When you do control Iori though, you can still work together with Saber for combination abilities and the like. Overall, the combat is good, But as the game went on, it did feel a bit shallow at points, mostly tied to the shields that the larger enemies have. Certain enemies won't take any meaningful damage until a shield is broken, but for the most part, you'll be chipping away at it unless you play as your servants. Later on, Iori certainly does get more powerful and has more of an effect here, but early on you're pretty dependent on Saber to break through. It's even more pronounced on boss fights, which often will refresh their shields when they hit a certain health level. Yeah, it's thematically correct, other servants aren't going to be pushovers at the end of the day, but I would have liked something more inspired there to show off their strength. That being said though, it is cool seeing the partnership of Iori and Saber as they make their way through the ritual. Now, talking about that relationship, it's a good time to jump to the characters themselves. It's a mixed bag, I'd say. There's some clear frontrunners and a couple of disappointments in equal measure. The chemistry between Iori and Saber though is really strong. It visibly improves over the course of the game, and they transform into a partnership that rely on each other in the later stages. The other servants and masters are fairly compelling too, each with their own dynamics, and it's really cool to see how Iori and Saber interact with them. Part of the intrigue of Fate's Day Night at least was how the various duos schemed and aimed to eventually win. Samurai Remnant takes on a similar approach. There's plenty of planning and scheming in the shadows, and in some cases it does work in the game's benefit. But sometimes it does meander. You're often going back to your base to then go to another far off district, which requires a sort of tower capture minigame in between, which I wasn't a fan of personally. Then when you get there, you fight through a level, see a story sequence, and return back to base just to do it all over again. And eventually, this design philosophy started to give me some deja vu. The more I played Samurai Remnant, the more I started to feel that it was retreading the original visual novel in some ways. For example, Saber herself. Without going into spoiler territory, just look at the designs between this iteration and the one we're more familiar with. The eyes, the ahoge, the gluttonous personality, the likeness was uncanny. And there were plenty of other moments that I looked at and thought, wow, that was weirdly familiar. Again, this video isn't going into spoiler territory, so I won't delve further there, but the similarities were striking at points. Undoubtedly though, the biggest inspiration Samurai Remnant took from the original was in the multiple routes. Just like Fate's Day Night, this game has 3 separate routes that prioritises different characters within the story and ultimately all end differently. It is worth noting that there is an additional joke ending if you see a certain part of side content to the end too. For the main story routes though, you have to play through the game at least once to see the third route, and then play back to that point at which the story diverges on New Game Plus. Samurai Remnant makes this second playthrough fairly simple though, as it allows you to carry over all your progress so you can steamroll through all the events you've already seen. But the question remains, is it worth playing through the game at least twice to see these routes? Well, there's a dichotomy here because the routes are simultaneously the best parts of the game and also the most disappointing. My biggest issue was that they split far too late in the game, meaning that the endings were underwhelming. Sure, they end in different ways, but I feel that the stories themselves and the characters involved in them deserved way more attention than they got. They didn't have sufficient time to marinate into the great masterpieces that they could have been. Referencing Fate's Day Night once again, the visual novel split very early on for the 3 routes, so each one felt wholly distinct from each other. It was like a whole new experience every time. Samurai Remnant on the other hand splits at around 2/3 through the game, so many of the events are the same till that point, but the developments afterwards just don't have the impact that I feel they could have had if they were given more focus and time. It ultimately meant that I ended up let down by characters like Chiemon, who I strongly believed had the potential of being the best character in the entire game. And that wasn't the only one I was disappointed in. The final route, which you only get on that second playthrough, it should have been the best route by a mile. The actual content of that route was perfect, but it ends so quickly. You make the choice, do a final battle, and it ends maybe 20 minutes after that choice is made. And it's a tough one really, because I do think the writers were well within their rights of ending it there and then. But because I was so looking forward to it, I was just head in hands as I watched the credits roll, because I was so on board with what they were going with in that final route. Everything in the game pointed to this moment. The build up to it was really good, but it just ended in a muted manner. Not entirely flat, but not what I hoped for either. And that's my biggest gripe. Fate Samurai Remnant was really good in a lot of areas, but I felt let down with those endings. They were just missing something to make them truly memorable. If they had stuck the landings of, say, 2 out of 3 of those endings, it would have been one of my games of the year. But because it ended up short, it goes down as a great game to me, but nothing more than that. The 5th game I played was Xenosaga Episode 2, which took me 26 hours to beat and played via emulator. I did a full 30-minute video on this recently. My patrons voted for the game to be covered as part of the retro series, and I was more than happy to oblige. So if you want my full thoughts on it, you can watch that video. Here, you're just gonna get the TLDR. It's the weakest of the trilogy with some baffling design decisions. The OST is shaky, with cutscenes having great music, while the overworld music is less consistent. The art direction is weird, and the combat system is great for bosses, but a slog for normal enemies. The actual story is really good though. And the same method is going to be used for the 6th game I played, Xenosaga Episode 3, which took me 38 hours to finish. TLDR, it's the best game of the series. Best animation, best music, best combat, best cutscenes, and it all ends in a satisfying manner. But Shion is really mean in this game.
I hope you didn't make any mistakes this time.
The 7th game I played was a must-play for many RPG fans, no exceptions here as well, in Star Ocean Second Story R. I played it on PC and it took me 41 hours to finish. Second Story R, like a few other games in the series, sports a dual protagonist feature. You get a choice between either Claude or Reina, and follow their stories as they seek to stop the odd phenomenon occurring on the planet Expel. Both of the stories overlap for the most part, but there are specific moments with each that make a second playthrough worthwhile. Now, Second Story R for me is another one of those games that is all about the gameplay. If you place more importance on that and don't care at all about the story, you'll most likely love the game. On the other hand, if you place more importance on story, you'll probably find it harder to be swayed. In all, the game ended up being a great experience to me, but I couldn't put it above that because of the issues I had with the narrative and characters. So let's start with the good stuff first. First of all, I have to say that regardless of the quality of the game itself, it's just a very good remake. It's optimised well, it brings in many quality of life features to bring it up to modern standards like fast travel, marking where certain optional events are, the ability to mass level up IC skills. Just as a remake, it does a really good job. As for the game itself though, initially it looks absolutely amazing. The pixel art style has been sharpened and polished to a beautiful sheen, and it works extremely well. The planet of Expel in the early stages feels grand, expansive, and the towns all express their own unique personalities. Now, some people may feel that the style doesn't work too well for the battles themselves, as there may be too many animations going on the screen at any point in time, making it difficult to see what's occurring, but I never had an issue with that. The meat of the combat is also pretty good. It's a nice take on an action RPG that does show its age at points, but I had a good time with it overall. A lot of characters to try out, plentiful amounts of skills to mix and match, and a decent level of options are given to the player in terms of group formations that grant additional bonuses in battle. These battles also demonstrate the great OST overall. The battle themes are absolute bangers and the game does pretty well in this facet, even outside of fights. However, the thing that really allows the combat to stand out doesn't even exist in the battles themselves. From what I was reading on other people's experiences, Star Ocean Second Story R goes through a weird trajectory in terms of difficulty, in that it starts really easy but gets quite arduous by the end. Though at the same time, Second Story R gives you all of the tools you need to circumvent that difficulty pretty much from the beginning. And if you comprehend the systems on offer, you can break the game so quickly it becomes a joke by the later stages. If anything, that is the highlight of the game, how quickly you can break it. Every character has a host of specialties tied to them, and they all have a specific use. For example, you can make new weapons, but then you can customize them further into ridiculously powerful versions early on. Leveling also becomes a simple endeavour. Level up the effort skill to the max early on to lower the amount of skill points required to increase the levels of the other skills, and then use, say, scouting, along with the bodyguard super specialty to blitz all enemies without even fighting. If you do get into a fight, use the guard formation, which makes you immune to status ailments, and you pretty much become unbeatable. There's a staggering amount of customization available to the player, and they all enrich the gameplay in a multitude of ways, either through combat, equipment management, or traversing the world itself. It's easily the best part about the game, and I get the impression that freedom was the modus operandi of Star Ocean 2. No single playthrough would ever be the same. Not only are there a multitude of ways to just break the game, which can become a joy in of itself, there are a massive amount of recruitable characters during the journey too. While Claude and Raina are required, there are a host of other members who you will meet in the journey too. But not all of them can be taken on a single playthrough, and some of them will outright be locked off depending on what choices you make and what protagonist you used. It once again becomes a decent element of the game and feeds into another reason as to why a second playthrough is worthwhile. That being said, this is where we start to get to the negative side. The characters themselves outside of Claude and Raina are very shallow. You get their backstories and their motivations before they join, but once they do join, it pretty much just dissipates to nothing. Celine's treasure hunting obsession seems to vanish, and Ashton's desire to rid himself of his affliction gets a small follow-up, but it also seems to be abandoned soon after as well. Now, I imagine that this lack of depth is mostly again due to its age and the fact that a lot of these characters are optional, so it's a case of ambition outstripping the means available at the time. So I'm more willing to forgive it there. It doesn't help as well that the English voice acting drawn from the PSP version is shaky to say the least.
Oh, aren't you the boy who took second place in the armory contest?
Huh?
Don't you remember seeing him at the tournament, Leon?
I don't remember it. I couldn't be bothered to watch.
Oh, but I bet your majesty would, right?
Yes, the boy who almost took the championship from Diaz's grasp. I remember it well.
It's also a product of its time, and you can definitely hear that. There's a lack of inflection at many points, as if the voice actors didn't know the context by which they were saying their line, and delivery of the lines feels inconsistent throughout. As a result, I decided to use the newly recorded Japanese voiceovers because of it. Now, it's not just the supporting cast of characters that I had issue with. In total, there were 3 aspects that I think held Second Story R back from masterpiece status. Ranging in severity, the first issue was the side characters, which we've already discussed. Second was the story itself, and last were the antagonists. So homing in on that second point, the story. It's basic. And basic stories are fine. You can tell some enjoyable adventures through this medium as long as it's presented well. A good story does not have to be some deep pseudo-intellectual trip about life and death. Some people like to misunderstand that. There are plenty of simple stories out there that are very well told, and thus become memorable. Radiant Dawn is an example of that, as is Trails in the Sky first chapter. However, Second Story R struggles with this. I saw a very interesting quote from someone else in reference to the story of this game, a line that was profound and very accurate, I'd say. The quote was that Star Ocean Second Story R has a better story than it has writing. What that means is that there are moments within the narrative that are genuinely interesting and thus should be memorable, but they're simply not conveyed as well as they should have been in order to reach that emotional pitch. There are plentiful moments within Second Story R that should be a home run, but the way those moments are handled just don't feel right, like characters overcoming a traumatic event a bit too quickly, and thus the development that comes with that feels contrived and unnatural. There are also moments where important events seem to once again dissipate, just like the arcs of the characters. The start of Claude's journey, for example, which eventually leads him to being stranded on Excel. That first area seemed important, but you never see it again. No explanation as to its significance, no backstory as to why there was a device there to transport Claude. It's jarring, and apparently that plot hole is answered in a completely different form of media. An anime of all things that was eventually cancelled unceremoniously. And talking about unceremoniously, that leads us to my biggest grievance with this game. The antagonists. Probably the greatest entrance and introduction ever, followed by the worst execution I can remember in recent experience. I don't remember a single one of their names. Come the end, I didn't understand their motivations, their origin, their personalities, nothing. They were just bad guys that I had to kill. Now again, just like the introduction for Claude's story, these grievances are addressed in optional content. So it's using that Souls-like style of storytelling where all the information is available but you have to go out of your way to find it. To be fair though, this game came out before the first Souls game, so you can say its style, it's more its own, but a Souls-like style of storytelling is the best way I can describe it. Now the method itself is fine. I actually really enjoy Souls-like storytelling, that process of piecing together all aspects of the story and building my own view of the world I'm in. It's a method that works and has been very successful. There is a key difference though as to why it works in Souls and doesn't work in Second Story R. The difference is in the makeup of the games. In Souls games, a player who has never played a Souls-like can easily finish, say, Dark Souls with a blind playthrough and simultaneously not understand the story at all. There are a few cutscenes here and there, but it's purposely obtuse. It was never the main focus of the game. A traditional JRPG though is different. It presents a linear story through the medium of cutscenes and heavy uses of dialogue that moves from point to point. Thus, a key goal of the developers is to have the player relate to the protagonists in some way and get them invested in the journey they find themselves on. In order to do that though, you must give all the elements to the player to deliver on that premise. All essential information to aid in fully comprehending the story must be given to the player through the main storyline itself, and not locked behind easily missable events. If you're going for that focus and want players to empathise with what is happening on screen, you need to provide all elements to allow it to happen. Second Story R falls into this trap, but it is by no means the only game guilty of this. Some of my favourite RPGs like Trails to Azure do exactly the same thing, and I've always been against it. So in all, Second Story R ended up being a great game. If I had to put a number to it, an 8 out of 10. But it never goes above that because of those 3 main issues I had. Still, one of the better RPGs I played this year. The 8th game I played was the first in the remastered collection for Baten Kaitos in Eternal Wings and the Lost Ocean, or simply Baten Kaitos 1. It was played on Switch and took me 49 hours to beat. Baten Kaitos takes place in the skies where Callus is on a journey to avenge the death of his grandfather and little brother. During this time, he and a host of other characters find a more sinister plot afoot, and they must find the 5 pieces of Exodia in order to prevent the rise of the Forbidden One. I am not exaggerating, that is the story. In seriousness though, Baten Kaitos surprised me, in a very good way. It was a breath of fresh air from all the other RPGs I played this year, and I'll say it right away, I recommend it to anyone looking for a card-centric turn-based RPG. The first thing I latched onto immediately was its premise and narrative angle. Whereas in many RPGs you're taking the role of a certain character and witnessing their journey, in Baten Kaitos you are playing as, well, you. You're not controlling Callus. You're simply joining him on his journey from your own world, working as a team. The game plays on this idea a whole lot, with characters turning towards the player at points and asking you for your opinion at certain junctures, and these choices do have meaning over the course of the game too, depending on how the character perceives it. It sounds weird, but it's used extremely well and aids massively in overall immersion. And that idea is followed through right to the end, which they nailed. It was kind of a bittersweet moment because it's structured in a way where you've assisted in the peace of this land and now you must go back to your own world to try and fulfill your goals. It's profound and surprisingly deep. I was very impressed with that. Now the game is mostly split between exploration and the card-based battles. Exploration takes place in fairly closed off locales, but that's all good for me because the art direction is an absolute win here. I love the pre-rendered backgrounds and the art style for the sprites too, really well done on that front. Despite that rigidness in the world design though, there is plenty to find around the world. There are side quests to complete, hidden roads to treasure, and they're generally always worth it. In Baten Kaitos you're seeing you're not gaining armor or weapons for engaging in side content. What you're actually getting are cards called Magnus in this universe, which are the contained essences of a particular item that you can use in battle or aid in the progression of your character. You'll notice very quickly that Baten Kaitos is not like many other RPGs. It throws many of the staples out the window and forces you to play by its rules. For example, I was given no tutorial on how to play, at least not in the traditional way. Tutorials are there, but they are given to you through the NPCs themselves. NPCs that you are often not required to talk to. They are often put in areas that would compel you to talk to them just out of habit, so it's a fine balance the game has going on there. Leveling up and equipment management is just the same. You don't level up through just battling in this game. Rather, you get the experience and then you have to visit the Pope or whatever who will grant you your levels. Once again, there's merit in this though, in that if you stack up experience from multiple levels, you get a modifier that increases your stats slightly more if you choose to wait it out. Equipment as well is not done through simply donning a breastplate or a helmet, rather there is a single piece of equipment specific to each character and it gradually improves as the game goes on. But in many cases, you have to go out of your way to find them, so exploration is certainly a strong point of Baten Kaitos overall. But what about the cards themselves? Well, outside of overworld use, in most cases you use them in battle. Every character has a deck of cards that you can freely customize in the way you want. There are certain cards specific to each character, but there's still plenty to go around here. This deck is then utilized in battle, where cards are drawn into your hand and then you use these cards to either attack or defend. These cards are characterized by their elements and by those numbers in the corners as well, which both have importance. The elements, for example, work in an opposite kind of way. Water and fire as a pair, dark and light as a pair, and wind and earth as a pair. Some enemies will be weak against certain elements, but you also need to think about what elements you're using during your own turn. For example, if you use a water-based attack and then follow it with a fire-based attack, you will actually reduce the amount of damage you do because the attacks will cancel each other out. So it pays to have diversity in your deck makeup to cover all elements, but you also run the risk of having too much diversity that it lowers its overall power. The numbers on the other hand play an important role too. The idea is to use the cards in sequential order to increase the potency of the move. So for example, if you start with a card marked number 1, you'd want your next attack card to be a 2, and then a 3, and so on until you get a straight. So it's not just the balance of offensive to defensive cards in your deck you need to contend with, it's also the balance of Magnus values along with their elements to make those moves worthwhile in the first place. And that's what I love about this system. The game is difficult at points, but any sort of difficulty spike can be circumvented in, yes, the traditional method of leveling up, but mostly through the composition of your deck. For example, if an enemy is highly resistant to dark-based attacks, take all dark-based attacks out of your deck and replace them with light. It's mechanics like this that ensure that every fight in Baten Kaitos is unique and challenging, but never unfair. If you're having trouble, the first thing you need to look at is the makeup of your deck. Saying that, that's not the only reason why the boss battles are awesome. Take a listen to this. The OST in Baten Kaitos slaps more bass than a fishmonger. The overmap tunes are great, but the boss battle themes kick so much arse they've been proclaimed MMA champion. awesome rock music, electric guitar riffs that shred harder than a platinum inlaid cheese grater. Like, just play the game for the music alone. Even if you don't like what Baten Kaitos has to offer, you can at least rock out while you cry. This game is just awesome. It's so different to many contemporaries that it never should have been as good as this. There are so many new ideas that shouldn't come together as well as they do here, but they do. Baten Kaitos is brilliant. And the thing is, yeah, I do have a few gripes of it. I don't like how leveling up your class imposes a gradually more severe time limit on your turns. Some of the areas are absolute arse to navigate, and there's no dub, which is a problem for some people, but not for me. It is worth mentioning nonetheless. But that being said, the negatives are so minor compared to the overall shining beacon of the package here that I pretty much forgot they even existed. I'll say it again, Baten Kaitos is brilliant. One of the best RPGs I played this year, and a must buy for anyone who likes card-based RPGs. Heck, even people who are simply just fans of traditional JRPGs will have to try it out. It's a shame that it got hardly any fanfare when it did release, so I'm gonna do my part here and tell you to buy it. The 9th game I played was a cotton-framed walk down memory lane with the Super Mario RPG Remake. It was played on Switch, of course, and it took 10 hours to finish. It was like I had gone back to being 5 years old again. The Super Mario RPG Remake was everything I wanted it to be and more. I never got to finish this game way back when, since my friend who eventually moved back to America was the one who owned the game, but some of my fondest memories in gaming are traced right back to the original. Having the chance to revisit it and be as faithful as it was to the original, I couldn't ask for more. In Super Mario RPG, you play as, you guessed it, Mario. He's on his way to rescue Princess Peach from Bowser yet again, but before he can do so, a massive sword pierces through Bowser's castle, and Mario must set forth to find 7 power stars to save the kingdom, or something like that. He thus sets forth on his quest around the land to find these stars, meeting various allies along the way. It's going to be a very familiar premise to anyone who has played a Mario title before, and that is its biggest strength. I have a frame of mind, an expectation when I play a Mario game. I'm expecting light-hearted humour, platforming, excellent sound design, and colourful visuals. Super Mario RPG hits every single facet and excels in each one. It combines the RPG and platforming genres beautifully. It's seamless. On the overworld, you'll be jumping around to find power-ups, secret treasure chests, and talking to the inhabitants of the kingdom, while battle takes a typical turn-based style with a little Mario flair to aid in its charm. While said combat is as simple as it gets, you've got time-based mechanics there to increase the damage you do, along with granting the attack an AoE effect. Every character has engaging skills they can use. For example, Mario can do a super jump on enemies, and pressing the A button at the right time allows for more jumps. You've got team-based special moves with added cinematics that look amazing, but it's still rooted in familiarity since you've got all the elements you would expect in a turn-based battle system like item usage, status effects, and standard leveling up. There are even certain challenges tied to these battles that will grant the best gear in the game, which are actually quite difficult to achieve, so there's definite challenge there despite its ease of access. But the one thing I adore about this game is that I was smiling, laughing at nearly everything happening. It was absurd, it was manic, but it's Mario. I expect this to happen. For example, cutscenes that double as mini-games where the music plays in the background and what happens on screen matches the beat as the sequence plays out. You're actually getting involved in those moments and it's hilarious. Talking about mini-games, there's so many of them in Super Mario RPG, but they're never forced or contrived. They always flow directly into the makeup of the journey itself. You could be composing a musical masterpiece one minute and then flowing down river rapids collecting coins on the next. The characters are brilliant, familiar yet wonderful designs for the returning casts, charming appearances for the new entries, and dialogue that is so simple but so impactful at the same time. This is how you do dialogue correctly. Super Mario RPG had a tone in mind, and everything you see on screen is tailored to fit that atmosphere, and it succeeds in basically every area. It is a resounding success. Again, one of the best RPGs I played this year, and likely one of the best I'll play in the coming years too. I adore this game. I recommend it to anyone who has a Switch, and heck, I'd recommend it to people who aren't even fans of the genre. This one here is a great game to get people introduced to the world of JRPGs for the first time. It's charming, it's goofy, it's got a familiar premise, and a host of lovable characters. You can't ask for more than that. The 10th game I played was one I was looking forward to this year in Crymachina, played on PC, and it took me around 11 hours to finish. Now some people may already know what I think about Crymachina, as I put it on my disappointing RPG lists for the year. As such, I'll keep my commentary concise since I said everything I wanted in Crymachina in that video, but if you want a more in-depth look, you can check that out. It takes place many years after the extinction of humanity, upon a ship called Eden that has a collection of functions within it. Said functions are there to eventually revive humanity, and 8 Deus Ex Machina reside over those functions. It's here where Anoa, one of the 8, revives Laban, and she joins 2 other members of, quote, the family in Makoto and Ami in a quest to become a real human. The premise is good, it's actually got a decent story tied to it. The characters aren't going to be everyone's cup of tea admittedly, but the actual themes covered are interesting and they're conveyed fairly well. However, most of my time with Crymachina was indifferent at best. My issue with the game is that it was a lot of style and little substance. A game that looks a lot better than it really is. It's not bad, it's just an average formulaic experience when I personally think it could have been more than that. On one hand, you have the interesting character designs, the great OST, and the immersive stages that really sell the scale of the game, while on the other you have the rigid structure that is on display within the first hour. Complete a stage, beat a boss, see cutscenes, level up and move on. It works and it keeps the flow of the story there, but it's just so limited overall, and results in a shallow gameplay experience. The most notable example there comes in the combat itself. It looks really good, but is actually extremely basic. A basic combat system is fine, but what it does need, at minimum, is a gradual evolution. New skills or abilities added to the makeup to keep the game fresh, especially when its game design is pushing players towards repeating stages. The issue with the combat is that it never changes. The characters don't learn any new abilities over the course of the game. What you start with is what you end with, and the only thing that kind of changes are the auxiliaries, which aren't enough to keep the experience fresh. If you're a fan of action RPGs, you'll get some fun out of it, but I wouldn't go in expecting anything masterful. If you can say, get it on sale, I'd say that's good value for money. The last game I played was also the last game I wanted to complete for 2023 in Kuro no Kiseki 2 Crimson Sin. I played it on PC and it took 51 hours to finish, but I will cop out here because I want to do a fully dedicated video on it for next week, so you're gonna have to wait a little longer for that one. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.